Good morning, students, and welcome to the second part of my introductory course on describing diagrams. So please look at sheet number 2. At the top of the page you can see 4 diagrams. On the top right hand side you can see 4 headings. Here is your first question. Match each of the headings with each diagram. Please pause the audio now. Okay, your answers should be: diagram A is life expectancy, B is healthcare, C is literacy rates, and D is city versus country. Versus, VRSUS, means to compete with or oppose. For example, Manchester City versus Newcastle. Now look at the questions on the left, A to D, and pause the audio while you answer these questions. These questions, of course, refer to each of the individual diagrams A, B, C, and D. So let's look at A, question 1. The figures at the top of the chart refer to the life expectancy of men and women in different countries. For example, in China, the average age at which women die is 71. Question 2. Who lives the longest of all, men or women, and where? The highest age is in Australia at age 80, and this is for women. Now let's look at questions B. Number 3. There are 5 slices of the pie chart. Number 4, what do they represent? They represent the ratio of patients to doctors in different countries. Question 4, what do the figures represent? They represent the number of people, not patients. Patients assumes they are ill. And number 5, the country where doctors have the fewest patients is Latvia, where there are only 200 people to each doctor. Now on to C. Question 6. What does the bar chart compare? It compares the ability to read and write between males and females in 5 different countries. Question 7. F and M, of course, represent female and male. And question 8. The figures at the top of the chart represent the percentage of men or women who can read and write in that area. And D, question 9. What proportion of the world is described as developing in 1990? This last diagram is a bit more tricky than the other ones. You have to be a little bit careful. The information is more complicated. So the proportion of the world developing in 1990, we have to look at 2 areas: urban developing and rural developing. Total of 52 plus 25 equals 77%. So 77% of the world was described as developing in 1990. And question 10, what proportion of the world is predicted to be developing in 2025? Again, this is the sum of two numbers, 46% and 37%. Total 83% of the world is predicted to be developing in 2025. Okay, now go on to the three questions at the bottom left-hand side of the page. Please pause the audio while you answer these questions. So let's look at literacy rates for men and women in Africa first. Now the actual percentages for males are 61.7% and for females 38.5%. So if you want to answer this question in the most boring way, you can just say in Africa 61.7% of men can read and write compared with 38.5% of women. But this is not what you want to do in an exam or in a presentation. To make it easier for your audience to see the significance of the information, we need to add some words. I think we could say, for example, that the literacy rate for men in Africa is around 50% higher than it is for women. Using this percentage, it quite clearly shows you the difference in an understandable way between men and women. 50% higher. Be careful here, students often make the mistake of saying it is about 20% higher. They look at the numbers 38 and 61, they see, oh, the difference is about 20, so this means that men have a 20% higher rate of literacy than women. But all you mathematicians will know this is a fundamental mistake. The difference is around 50%. If you don't understand this, I suggest you spend a little bit of time looking at the numbers. Amazingly, I see something like 80% of my students making this mistake, even students from departments such as science or engineering. It would also be important here to mention the actual total literacy rate levels. So we could say that the literacy rate levels are between around 40 to 60% for men and women. This is important because this means there is around half of the population in Africa who cannot read and write. If we take the average between 40 and 60, this is 50. So this implies the population in Africa, half of them cannot read or write. Remember, when you are describing diagrams, think about what the significance of the information means. This will make it easier for you to present the information in a meaningful and attractive way. So question 2, patients per doctor in Nepal and Latvia. First of all, we can see there is an enormous difference between the number of people or patients per doctor in these two countries. A quick calculation in your head will tell you that the ratio is exactly 100 times. You're never going to get this actually in a diagram, such an exact figure, but as an example, here you could say the ratio of people to doctors in Nepal is 100 times more than that in Latvia. To make it sound more attractive, you can say an incredible 100 times more than the ratio in Latvia. Because the numbers here are so widely different, we use multiples rather than say fractions or percentages. fractions and percentages we use when maybe the difference is not more than 100%. But when you're looking at 2, 3, 400% or more, then you should use multiples. We don't want to say that the ratio of patients to doctors in Nepal is 2,000% more than that's in Latvia. Sounds too clumsy. And question number 3, proportion of the world's population living in rural areas in 1990 and 2025. In 1990 we have a total of 52% plus 6%, which is 58%, and in 2025 we are expected to have 4% plus 37% equals 41%. So in absolute numbers, the population living in rural areas will be were, remember to get your tense right. It always sounds bad if the teacher uses the wrong tense. So it was 58% in 1990 and is expected to be 41% in 2025. How would we describe this in terms of percentage or fraction? Round up your numbers, round up or round down, so 60 to 40. So we're looking at a reduction of 20, which is around 30%. That is near enough. You don't have to be too exact. This is not a mathematics exam. So the important information here is that the population in the rural areas is expected to fall around 30% by 2025 compared with 1990. This is the significant information. Now move on to the last questions on the bottom right hand corner. Questions A to D again. Pause the audio while you answer these questions. You also want to use here the expressions from the box below. Okay, question number 1. Life expectancy for men and women in India is almost identical. Remember these expressions in the box. You should try to remember as good vocabulary to use in describing numbers. Question 2. An Australian woman can be expected to live almost twice as long as an Afghan woman. Question 3. The country with the greatest difference in life expectancy between men and women is the USA. Question 4. Doctors in Nepal have 20 times as many patients as doctors in the UAE. Question 5. There is a much lower literacy rate for women in Asia than in Oceania. Question 6. In America, Europe and Oceania there is little difference in literacy rates for men and women. By the way, if you don't know what Oceania refers to, this is a geographical area which I think includes Australia and New Zealand. Yes, I have just checked the map. It is Australia and New Zealand and just a part of southern Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. And question 7. In 1990, 25% or 1/4 of the developing world lived in urban areas. And last question 8. By 2025, about 46% of the population of the developing world will live in cities. Remember, urban means city living. Okay, students, this should be helping you now to develop the skills and techniques you need for describing diagrams. In the next part, we're going to look in more detail at the the diagrams A, B, C, and D. Notice the mistake I just made. I called the diagrams a graph, but actually none of these diagrams are graphs. So be careful with that. Probably best to use the word diagrams generally, because this way you cannot go wrong. In the next part we will be using this same sheet, so have this ready on your computer. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.